Malcolm sat quietly in the dimly lit corner of the art gallery, his fingers tracing the edges of the frame of his latest creation. His abstract painting, a swirl of vibrant reds, blues, and blacks, captured the chaotic beauty of the universe. It was his pride and joy, a piece that had taken months to complete. Yet, despite the passion behind the work, Malcolm couldn't help but feel the weight of the gallery owner's indifferent gaze. Vincent, the gallery owner, was a man of privilege, his sharp suit and slicked-back hair a clear indication of his status in the world of high art. He had been in the business for decades, running one of the most prestigious galleries in the city, showcasing the works of established artists. But today, as he scanned Malcolm's painting with barely concealed disinterest, it was clear that the young black artist did not fit into his narrow idea of what was worthy of attention. "You know," Vincent said, his voice dripping with condescension, "this kind of work doesn't really sell here." He waved a hand dismissively at the painting, as though the swirling patterns of color were nothing more than a trivial detail in the greater landscape of art. "People want realism, not, well, whatever this is." Malcolm's heart sank. He had been expecting some form of critique, but nothing prepared him for this blatant dismissal. The art world, as Vincent saw it, was an exclusive club, a world where only a select few could truly thrive. And as a black artist, Malcolm knew the odds were stacked against him. "I think you're missing the point," Malcolm replied quietly, trying to keep his emotions in check. He had faced this kind of criticism before, but that didn't make it any easier. "This piece represents the chaos of the universe, the unpredictability of life. It's more than just a painting, it's a reflection of who we are as people." Vincent raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. He crossed his arms and leaned back, his eyes scanning the other works on the walls with an air of superiority. "Perhaps," he said, "but art needs to be marketable. And I'm not sure your work fits that criteria. It's a little too avant-garde for my taste." Malcolm's chest tightened, but he refused to back down. He had spent years developing his style, pouring his soul into each brushstroke, and he wouldn't let a gallery owner who couldn't see beyond his own bias tear him down. Still, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. The art world was ruthless, and Vincent's opinion carried weight. If his work was dismissed here, where else could he go? "Look," Vincent continued, his tone softer now, almost patronizing. "I understand you're trying to make a statement, but the market simply isn't ready for this kind of work. If you want to sell, you need to think about your audience. The people who come here are looking for something they can understand. They don't want to be challenged, they want something safe. Something familiar." Malcolm clenched his fists at his sides, trying to calm the storm of frustration building within him. He knew that Vincent was wrong. The world was changing, and there was a growing demand for fresh, innovative voices in the art world. But no matter how much he believed in his work, he couldn't ignore the cold reality that artists like him, black artists, especially, were often overlooked or dismissed. Vincent's words stung even more, because they weren't just an attack on Malcolm's art, they were an attack on his very identity. The art world had always been a place of exclusion, where people of color were relegated to the sidelines, and their contributions were minimized or ignored altogether. But Malcolm had always refused to accept that fate. He had spent years building his reputation, carving out a space for himself, and he wasn't about to let one arrogant gallery owner define his worth. "With all due respect," Malcolm said, his voice firm, "I think you're wrong. My work has value, and people will recognize that. It's just a matter of time." Vincent smirked, clearly amused by Malcolm's confidence. "We'll see about that," he said, turning away to greet another customer who had entered the gallery. "But for now, I think it's safe to say that I won't be carrying your pieces here." Malcolm stood in stunned silence, the weight of Vincent's words settling heavily on his shoulders. He knew he had just been rejected, but it didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning of something else, something bigger than just one man's opinion. He was determined to prove Vincent wrong, to show the world that his art was more than just a passing fancy. As he left the gallery, the city streets outside felt colder than usual, the hum of traffic and the bustling crowds reminding him of the world's indifference. But Malcolm's resolve only grew stronger. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with rejection and doubt, but he was ready for the challenge. In the coming days, Malcolm would pour all of his energy into his work, pushing himself to new heights. He would find new avenues for his art, reaching out to collectors, curators, and galleries who were willing to see the value in his vision. But what Vincent didn't know, what no one knew, was that Malcolm wasn't just any artist. He wasn't someone struggling to make a name for himself. He was a man of hidden depths, a person with connections to the highest echelons of the art world. The truth was, Malcolm's work was worth millions, and Vincent's dismissal would be the catalyst for a dramatic shift in the balance of power. As Malcolm walked away from the gallery, he felt a sense of determination flood his veins. He would not be silenced. He would not be dismissed. He would show the world that art, like life, was full of surprises, and sometimes, the greatest masterpieces were the ones that were least understood at first. Malcolm spent the following days in solitude, surrounded by his canvases and the soft hum of the city outside his window. The rejection still stung, but it also ignited a fire within him, a determination to prove that his art was more than just a fleeting moment of expression. His phone remained silent, his inbox empty. The world, it seemed, had forgotten him. But Malcolm knew better. He had always known that his work was special. He simply needed to find the right people who would see it. As he sat down in front of his latest piece, a canvas so large it almost consumed the entire room, Malcolm's mind drifted. This particular painting, a chaotic swirl of color and form, had taken months to complete. The deeper he went into the piece, the more he realized it wasn't just an exploration of the human condition. It was a portal, a connection to something ancient, something beyond the ordinary. The symbolism had always been there, buried beneath the layers of paint, but only now did he begin to see it clearly. The more he studied his work, the more he felt a connection to something beyond the present. It was as if the swirling colors and shapes were pulling him into a space-time continuum that defied explanation. It was something almost supernatural, a cosmic thread that tied him to the universe, to the origins of art itself. Malcolm had always been drawn to the strange and mysterious. As a child, he had devoured stories of ancient civilizations and their lost knowledge, especially those of cultures that had thrived long before modern history had recorded their existence. He had often wondered if the stories were more than myth, if the knowledge, the power, that these civilizations had amassed was somehow embedded in the art they left behind. But it wasn't until recently that he began to connect the dots. His art, his abstract style, wasn't just an attempt to break free from traditional boundaries. It was a bridge to something greater. Each piece he created seemed to unlock a new layer of understanding, and with it, the sense that he was tapping into something far older than the art world itself. It was then that the phone rang, breaking the silence of his thoughts. He answered it without looking at the caller ID. "Malcolm?" "It's Grace," the voice on the other end said. Grace was an old college friend, a curator at a prestigious museum in the city. They had kept in touch over the years, although their paths had diverged. Grace was well established in the art world, and despite Vincent's dismissal of Malcolm's work, she had always believed in his talent. "I've been hearing things," Grace continued, her tone a little more serious than usual. "People are talking about your paintings. Some of the bigger collectors, the ones who don't usually dabble in contemporary art, they've been asking about you." Malcolm felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. "Collectors? For my work?" "Yeah," Grace said, her voice lowering. "I know you've been struggling to find the right gallery, but this is big. You've caught their attention. And I'm not sure if you know this, but your work is worth a lot more than you think." Malcolm felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" Grace hesitated. "I don't want to jump the gun here, but I've done a little digging. Some of the patterns in your paintings, especially the ones with the fractal designs and the overlapping layers, they match up with patterns found in ancient art. There are theories that these kinds of designs have hidden meanings, maybe even connections to lost technologies. Some collectors believe they hold value not just as art, but as relics. You may not realize it, but your paintings are part of something much larger. something that dates back thousands of years. Malcolm sat back, his mind racing. This wasn't just a revelation, it was a game-changer. He had always known there was something unique about his work, but to think that it could be tied to lost knowledge, something ancient and possibly priceless, was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Grace continued, "I'm not the only one who sees this, Malcolm. There's a market for this kind of thing, serious collectors who understand the depth of your work. They're willing to pay top dollar for it, too." His thoughts whirled as the implications began to settle in. He had been dismissed by Vincent and the gallery world, but what if there was more to his art than anyone realized? What if, just like the unknown mysteries of the ancient world, his paintings held the key to something much more valuable than fame or recognition? "I need to think about this," Malcolm said, his voice tinged with awe. "I get it," Grace said. "Take your time, but I think you should start exploring these opportunities. People are watching. And they'll be more than willing to pay you for what you've created." As he hung up the phone, Malcolm's heart raced. He had been painting for years, but never had he imagined that his work could be tied to something as profound as lost knowledge or ancient power. The patterns, the colors, the symbols, everything he had poured into his paintings now seemed like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting to be assembled. But there was still a lingering doubt in his mind. If this discovery was true, why had it taken so long for anyone to recognize the value in his work? Why had Vincent so easily dismissed him? And if this was truly ancient knowledge embedded in his art, what did that mean for him as the creator? Could he truly be the custodian of such profound secrets? As the days passed, Malcolm threw himself into his work with renewed vigor. He began to study his paintings, looking for deeper connections, searching for the hidden meanings that Grace had alluded to. The more he explored, the more he realized that there were patterns in his work that he could not explain, patterns that seemed to align with cosmic forces, ancient symbols, and the mysterious energy of the universe itself. One evening, as Malcolm worked late into the night, he stumbled upon a discovery that made his blood run cold. He had always known there was something unique about his art, but now he realized that it wasn't just the aesthetic appeal that made it valuable. It was the energy it contained, something beyond the physical realm. And what's more, it was connected to something far older than he could have ever imagined. His work was not merely an expression of his emotions or a reflection of the world around him. It was a key that could unlock secrets lost to time, a key that could alter the very fabric of reality itself. For the first time, Malcolm understood the true power of his art. It wasn't just about fame or fortune, it was about tapping into something greater than himself. Something that had been hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right person to uncover it. And as he looked at his paintings, now imbued with a new understanding, he knew that his journey had only just begun. The days following his conversation with Grace were filled with confusion and excitement, a whirlwind of emotions that had Malcolm second-guessing everything he thought he knew about his work. The patterns, the connection to lost knowledge, the hidden value, all of it was overwhelming. But despite the revelation of the potential worth of his paintings, there was one constant that refused to fade: Vincent's mocking dismissal. Malcolm had tried to put Vincent's words out of his mind, but the gallery owner's scornful tone echoed in his head, reverberating with each brushstroke. His rejection felt like a challenge, one that Malcolm was determined to rise above. Still, despite his newfound understanding of his work's potential, it was impossible to ignore the fact that the art world, particularly the world that Vincent represented, hadn't seen his true worth. The snub was personal, but it was also part of a bigger problem, one that Malcolm had witnessed firsthand in the years he had spent in the art scene. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Vincent wasn't the only one who dismissed him. The art world at large had always overlooked the voices of people like him, black artists, who often found their work relegated to the margins. Even now, with the knowledge that his paintings held value beyond anyone's imagination, Malcolm was still viewed through the lens of prejudice. His work wasn't marketable, Vincent had said. It didn't fit the mold of what collectors and gallery owners were used to. It wasn't safe. It wasn't familiar. Malcolm could feel his frustration mounting. He needed to prove himself, not just to Vincent, but to the entire art world. And so, when he received an invitation to an exclusive gala thrown by one of the most influential collectors in the city, he knew this was his chance. This wasn't just an art show, it was a gathering of the elite, the movers and shakers who dictated the trends of the art world. If Malcolm could make an impact here, it would send a message. He wasn't just some unknown artist trying to make a name for himself, he was a force to be reckoned with. The night of the gala arrived, and Malcolm dressed carefully, selecting an outfit that blended sophistication with his own artistic flair. He wasn't going to let anyone see him as just another struggling artist. He would walk into this room like he belonged, like he was a part of the world that had so often rejected him. The event was held in an opulent ballroom, where sparkling chandeliers hung from the ceiling and the air was filled with the scent of expensive perfume and fine wine. It was a scene that felt almost surreal to Malcolm, the world of privilege and power so foreign to him, yet he moved through it with a quiet confidence. He scanned the room, his eyes searching for the familiar faces of collectors and gallery owners, but there was one person he was particularly focused on, Vincent. There he was, standing near the bar, engaged in a conversation with a group of well-dressed people. Vincent looked exactly the same as he had when Malcolm had last seen him, arrogant, smug, and completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Malcolm made his way toward the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment. He didn't just want to show Vincent that he was capable of success, he wanted to show him that the world was changing, and the old gatekeepers like him were losing their grip. When Vincent noticed Malcolm approaching, his expression shifted, though it was hard to tell if it was recognition or just the calculated smile he reserved for anyone he deemed important. "Malcolm, right?" Vincent said, his voice dripping with that same condescension that Malcolm remembered so well. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited," Malcolm replied coolly, keeping his tone steady. "I'm just here to see what the art world has to offer." Vincent's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Malcolm could see the flicker of discomfort behind his professional demeanor. "Ah, I see. Well, good for you. I trust you're enjoying yourself?" "Actually," Malcolm said, his voice growing more confident, "I'm here to make a point. I'm here to show that I'm not just some artist struggling for attention. I'm here to show that I belong in this space. And that my work, my real work, has a place in the world of high art." Vincent's smirk deepened, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He seemed amused by the boldness of Malcolm's statement. "That's ambitious of you. But, let's be real, Malcolm. There's a reason your work hasn't been shown in any major galleries. You can't just waltz in here and expect to be accepted into this world." Malcolm's jaw clenched, but he held his ground. He wasn't about to let Vincent's words diminish his newfound confidence. "I think the world is changing, Vincent. The old rules don't apply anymore. My art isn't just some trend. It has value, real, tangible value. And people are starting to realize that." Vincent laughed softly, as if the idea of Malcolm's work having value was a joke. "You're still a long way from that, my friend," he said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "But hey, I'm sure you'll find some niche market who'll appreciate whatever this is you're doing." Malcolm's patience was wearing thin. He could feel the mockery in Vincent's words, the dismissive attitude that he had faced for far too long. But instead of lashing out, Malcolm took a deep breath and glanced over at a group of collectors who were admiring a piece of artwork nearby. He didn't need to argue with Vincent anymore. He didn't need to prove anything to him. The collectors were already talking about his art, about the hidden meanings, the ancient symbols, the patterns that connected to something far greater than what anyone had imagined. "I think you'll be surprised, Vincent," Malcolm said calmly, locking eyes with him. "People are already starting to take notice. You might be too blind to see it, but the world is shifting." With that, Malcolm turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Vincent standing there with his glass raised, a look of bemusement still on his face. But Malcolm wasn't concerned about what Vincent thought anymore. He had seen the spark in the eyes of the collectors earlier, the way they had whispered to each other as they examined his paintings. They didn't need to be told how valuable his work was. They could feel it. And soon, the world would feel it too. As he left the gala, Malcolm's resolve hardened. Vincent's mockery was just another reminder of how far he had to go, but it was also a reminder of how far he had already come. He wasn't some unknown artist anymore. He was a force that could no longer be ignored. And Vincent? He would soon realize just how wrong he had been. The following weeks felt like a blur to Malcolm. The gala had been just the beginning of a wave of attention that was slowly but surely building around his work. The whispers he had heard about collectors interested in his paintings were more than just rumors. His phone was constantly ringing, his inbox filling up with inquiries. Invitations to private showings, meetings with potential buyers, and discussions with art investors filled his schedule. The same people who had once dismissed him now seemed eager to get a piece of his world, to claim a part of his future. It was surreal. But as Malcolm navigated this new world, he couldn't shake the feeling that something even bigger was at play. His work, he realized, wasn't just resonating with art collectors, it was resonating with something deeper, something almost mystical. The patterns, the symbols, the colors, each piece seemed to hold secrets beyond the visual. He could feel it in his bones, a pulsing energy in his paintings that no one had been able to recognize until now. It wasn't just art anymore. It was a doorway. One evening, as he stood in front of his latest painting, a large canvas covered in bold, intricate lines that seemed to shift and move the longer you stared at them, he felt a strange sensation wash over him. It was as if the painting was alive, pulsing with energy, almost beckoning him to step closer. The colors seemed to ripple in the low light of the studio, like something just beyond the surface was waiting to be unlocked. He placed a hand on the canvas, and for a moment, everything around him seemed to fade away. The sounds of the city, the rush of his thoughts, everything blurred into the background, and in that moment, Malcolm could sense a presence. It was ancient, distant, but unmistakably real. It was as if the painting itself had become a conduit, a link to something far beyond his understanding. The sensation was fleeting, but it left him shaken. He pulled his hand away from the canvas, his breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. What was happening? Was it the work itself that was affecting him, or was there something more, something hidden in the layers of color, in the geometry of the design? He shook his head, trying to dispel the feeling. Maybe he was just exhausted. Maybe all of the attention, the pressure, was finally getting to him. But the sensation lingered, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts, refusing to be ignored. The phone rang again, breaking his reverie. "Malcolm, it's Grace," came the voice on the other end. "You won't believe this, but there's a group of collectors who want to meet you. They're serious, real heavy hitters. They've seen your work, and they believe it's worth far more than you're asking. They're interested in buying several pieces for a private collection." Malcolm's heart skipped a beat. "Private collection?" "Yes," Grace confirmed, her voice low and serious. "They've got resources. This could be the start of something huge. I can set up a meeting, but you need to be prepared. These are not the typical buyers. They're interested in more than just your art, they want to understand the deeper meaning behind it. They're not just collecting paintings. They believe your work holds something significant." The mention of something significant immediately set off a flare of curiosity in Malcolm's mind. The words Grace spoke were eerily similar to the feeling he had experienced earlier, standing before his painting. They weren't just interested in the art. They were after something more. "Okay, set it up," Malcolm said, his voice steady but his mind racing. "I'll be ready." The meeting was scheduled for the following week. The excitement, however, was tempered by a growing sense of unease. Something was changing, and Malcolm could feel it in every fiber of his being. His work, which had once been dismissed, was now the object of intense interest. But the more attention it garnered, the more he wondered what these buyers, these collectors, knew about his work that he didn't. What was it they were looking for? And why did it feel like they were searching for something far more than just valuable art? The day of the meeting arrived, and Malcolm dressed carefully, opting for a simple, yet elegant suit that made him feel both confident and grounded. He had been to countless gallery openings and exhibitions, but this was different. These were not the everyday art collectors. These were people with power, people who could change the course of his career and his life. The meeting took place in a luxurious penthouse apartment, high above the city. The view was breathtaking, a sprawling panorama of lights, but Malcolm barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the individuals seated around a sleek, modern table. They were all impeccably dressed, their expressions unreadable. The leader of the group, a tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, extended his hand as Malcolm walked into the room. "Malcolm," he said with a slight nod, "we've been admiring your work for some time now. It's an honor to meet you in person." "Thank you," Malcolm replied, trying to mask the anxiety he felt. "I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all." "We're not just here to buy your paintings, Malcolm," the man said, his tone calm but intense. "We've studied your art, specifically the recurring patterns and symbols. There's a certain energy within your work. Something that doesn't quite belong in the realm of contemporary art. And we believe that energy is real." Malcolm's heart skipped a beat. He had heard that his work was different, but this was something else entirely. They weren't talking about the emotional resonance of his paintings. They weren't discussing his technique or his use of color. They were talking about something far deeper, something he hadn't fully understood himself. "What do you mean by energy?" Malcolm asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man smiled, but there was something unsettling in his eyes. "We believe your art holds the key to something much larger. Ancient symbols, lost knowledge, your work taps into something that humanity has forgotten, something hidden for millennia. The patterns in your paintings, they're not just random. They're the language of the universe. And we believe you've unlocked it." Malcolm could feel the weight of their words pressing down on him, the gravity of the situation sinking in. This was more than just a transaction. This was bigger than art, it was something cosmic, something that could change the very fabric of reality itself. "We'd like to offer you a deal, Malcolm," the man continued. "We'll buy your paintings at a price far beyond anything you've imagined, but we need something from you in return. We need you to help us unlock the full potential of your work." Malcolm sat back in his chair, his mind spinning. What were they asking of him? What had he truly stumbled upon with his art? And how far was he willing to go to understand the power hidden in his paintings? As he looked around the room, at the faces of the collectors, he realized one thing: his life was about to change forever. And there was no turning back. The meeting with the collectors had left Malcolm unsettled, his mind spinning with the weight of their words. They were no longer just buyers, they were seekers, searching for something in his work that was beyond the reach of ordinary collectors. They spoke of his paintings as keys, hidden pathways leading to knowledge and power that had been lost to the world for centuries. Malcolm couldn't deny the strange pull he felt toward his art. It had always been more than just something to hang on a wall. The colors, the patterns, the intricacy of the designs, there was a rhythm to it all that felt like it was tapping into something deep, something primal. But as much as he had always believed in his art, he had never considered it a vehicle for unlocking ancient secrets. The collectors had left him with more questions than answers. They had promised him wealth beyond his wildest dreams in exchange for his cooperation, but that didn't interest him as much as the implications of their offer. They weren't just interested in his talent, they wanted to understand the deeper layers of his work. They believed that the symbols and patterns embedded in his paintings could unlock lost knowledge, and possibly even lead to revelations about the universe itself. But what did that mean for Malcolm? What was the true nature of his work? And why had he, of all people, been chosen to create art with such power? The next few days were a blur. Malcolm couldn't focus on anything other than his paintings. He spent hours in his studio, staring at his work, trying to piece together the fragments of the puzzle that were scattered across the canvases. He had always painted with an instinctual knowledge, a feeling that his hands knew something his mind couldn't comprehend. But now, there was a new weight to the work. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of a discovery that could change everything. One night, as Malcolm worked late into the hours of the early morning, something strange happened. He stood before a painting that had become a focal point for him, a large canvas that seemed to pulse with energy the longer he stared at it. The intricate patterns that had once seemed abstract now appeared more organized, almost like a language he was beginning to understand. It was then that the sensation returned, the same feeling he had experienced before, that deep sense of connection to something beyond. The painting seemed to draw him in, the color swirling around him, and suddenly, his mind was flooded with images. They were flashes at first, distant places, forgotten landscapes, ancient civilizations, but then the images became clearer. He saw symbols, ones that matched the patterns in his paintings, etched into stone, carved into monuments, and painted on the walls of long-lost temples. These weren't just random shapes. They were a language, a code, something older than humanity itself. As the images continued to flood his mind, Malcolm felt a surge of energy, intense, overwhelming, coursing through him. His heart raced, his body trembling with the sheer force of it. The room seemed to shift around him, the boundaries between the physical and the metaphysical blurring as the symbols on the canvas seemed to come alive, twisting and dancing as if they were calling to him. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. Malcolm stumbled back, his chest heaving, sweat pouring down his face. The room was still. The painting on the canvas was the same, but he knew now that it was more than just paint on a surface. It was a map, a gateway. It was the key to something that he couldn't fully comprehend. He stood there in silence for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. His mind was reeling, torn between the overwhelming sense of wonder and the fear of what he had just glimpsed. He wasn't sure if what he had experienced was real or just a product of exhaustion, but one thing was certain. His art held something far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. The doorbell rang, pulling him from his thoughts. Malcolm wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to steady his breathing, and moved toward the door. When he opened it, he was greeted by Grace, her expression serious. "Malcolm," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." "About what?" Malcolm asked, his voice tight, still recovering from his experience with the painting. Grace closed the door behind her and leaned in, lowering her voice. "I've been doing some research. The people we met, the collectors, they're not who they say they are. I dug into their backgrounds, and what I found. Malcolm, these aren't just wealthy art enthusiasts. They're part of something much bigger, something dangerous." Malcolm's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "These collectors, this group, has been funding secret archaeological digs, trying to uncover ancient artifacts and knowledge. They've been tracking certain symbols and patterns for years, and they believe your work is the key to unlocking something that could change the world. And not in a good way." A cold chill ran down Malcolm's spine. "What are they after? What do they want from me?" Grace hesitated, clearly weighing her words. "They believe your art holds the key to an ancient power, a power that could give them control over everything. They want you to help them unlock it. And they're willing to do whatever it takes to get what they want." Malcolm felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This wasn't just about art. This was about something far more sinister. The collectors weren't interested in his paintings because they were beautiful or valuable, they were after something much darker. They wanted to harness the power embedded in the symbols, to use it for their own gain. They were searching for an ancient power that had been hidden for millennia, and they believed Malcolm's work could lead them to it. "Grace, I don't know what to do," Malcolm said, his voice trembling. "I don't want to be a part of this. I didn't ask for this. But now they know about my work. They're going to keep coming after me." Grace placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. "You don't have to do this alone, Malcolm. I'll help you. We'll figure out a way to stop them, to protect you and your art." But even as she spoke, Malcolm knew deep down that it wasn't going to be that easy. The collectors had power, money, influence, resources that could destroy him if they chose to. And worse, they had no idea what they were truly dealing with. They didn't understand the force they were trying to harness, and if they did, they wouldn't hesitate to use it for their own ends. Malcolm was caught between two worlds, the world of art and creation, and the dark world of ancient power and secrets. He had to make a choice, and it wasn't going to be easy. Malcolm spent the next few days and a daze, caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. Grace's warnings had struck him deeply, and he found himself unable to shake the image of the collector's cold, calculating eyes, their hunger for power hidden beneath their polished facades. He had always thought of his art as a way to express himself, to communicate his deepest feelings and observations about the world. But now, it had become a weapon, a key to an ancient force he didn't fully understand, and the very thing that had once brought him joy was now a source of danger and anxiety. Grace had urged him to be cautious, to stay low, but the situation felt like it was slipping through his fingers. The collectors weren't going to stop, they were persistent, and with the power they seemed to wield, they could destroy his career and his life in an instant if they chose to. But there was something else weighing on Malcolm's mind, the strange vision he had experienced in front of his painting, the flood of ancient images, symbols, and the overwhelming surge of energy that had coursed through him. He wasn't sure if it had been a vision, a hallucination, or something real, but whatever it was, it had felt profoundly significant. The painting had become more than just art, it had become a doorway. A doorway to something beyond his understanding. It was then that he made a decision. If the collectors wanted to unlock the power hidden in his work, then he would need to understand it first. He couldn't let them control it, couldn't let them exploit it for their own gain. But to do that, he had to know more about what he was dealing with, he had to explore the origins of the symbols and patterns in his art, trace them back to their roots, and unlock their secrets before anyone else did. And so, he embarked on a journey, one that would take him deep into the world of forgotten knowledge, lost civilizations, and the mysteries that had been buried for millennia. He couldn't do it alone, though. Grace had promised to help him, and he trusted her. But he knew that this was going to be a dangerous path. The deeper they delved into the unknown, the more they would risk exposure to the collectors and the forces they represented. But Malcolm had no choice. If he wanted to keep his art, and the world, from falling into the wrong hands, he had to take this risk. The first step was to find a way to decipher the symbols in his paintings. He began by reaching out to experts, historians, archaeologists, and linguists who specialized in ancient languages and cryptography. But no one seemed to be able to make sense of the symbols. They were unlike anything anyone had seen before, a complex mix of geometric patterns, abstract shapes, and strange markings that defied conventional interpretation. Then, one day, Grace contacted him with a lead. She had found a retired professor, Dr. Evelyn Green, who had spent years researching lost civilizations and the connection between art and ancient knowledge. She was known for her unconventional theories, but she had a reputation for being brilliant and open-minded. Grace had arranged a meeting, and Malcolm hoped she could shed some light on the mystery that had been haunting him. They met at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, a quiet place where they wouldn't be disturbed. Dr. Green was a woman in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a quiet intensity about her. She had the air of someone who had spent her life in pursuit of knowledge, someone who had seen more than her fair share of strange and inexplicable things. "Malcolm," Dr. Green said as they exchanged greetings, "I've been looking at the images you sent me, the ones from your paintings. They're extraordinary, unlike anything I've seen before. But I have to warn you, the path you're walking down is dangerous." Malcolm sat down, feeling the weight of her words. "I know. That's why I need your help. I need to understand what these symbols mean, what they're pointing to. I've seen things, felt things, that I can't explain. And I have this sense that my art, it's connected to something much bigger. Something ancient." Dr. Green leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "I believe you. These symbols, they are not just random shapes. They are part of an ancient language, one that was used by a civilization that existed long before our own. This civilization, whatever it was, had knowledge of the universe that was far beyond anything we can comprehend today. The symbols you're using in your paintings are remnants of that knowledge, and I believe they're a key to unlocking the mysteries of the cosmos." Malcolm felt a chill run down his spine. But what does that mean? What are these people trying to unlock? Dr. Green hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. There are myths, legends, of a group of beings, some call them the ancients, who possessed knowledge of a power beyond time and space. This power was hidden away, sealed from the world, because those who discovered it were unable to control it. It was said that those who sought to harness it would either be destroyed or consumed by it. The symbols you're using, Malcolm, they're a map. They point to a place, somewhere hidden, where the power is buried. Buried? Malcolm repeated, his voice barely a whisper. What kind of power are we talking about? The kind of power that could reshape the world, Dr. Green said, her voice low and serious. The kind of power that could change the fabric of reality itself. But the problem is, it's not just the collectors who are interested in it. There are others, secret societies, powerful organizations, who have been searching for this knowledge for centuries. They believe it holds the key to immortality, to control over life and death, and even to the ability to manipulate time. And they're willing to do anything to find it. Malcolm's mind was reeling. He had always thought of his paintings as a way to express his emotions, to capture a moment in time. But now, they were a doorway to something far more dangerous, a doorway that he had unknowingly opened. The collectors had been right all along, they weren't just interested in the art itself. They were after the power it could unlock. But Malcolm couldn't let them have it. He couldn't let anyone harness this power for their own gain. We have to stop them, he said, his voice firm, determined. We have to find the location of this power before they do. Dr. Green nodded, her expression grave. It won't be easy. The symbols are scattered, fragmented. But together, I think we can piece them together. It will take time and it will take careful planning. But we can do it. Malcolm knew that this journey would take him into uncharted territory, both literally and figuratively. He would have to dig deep, follow the trail of symbols, and uncover the secrets that had been hidden for millennia. But there was no turning back now. The power was real, and it was out there, waiting to be found. And no matter what it took, Malcolm would be the one to find it first. The days following Malcolm's meeting with Dr. Green felt like a blur of activity. The urgency to find the ancient power and the need to keep ahead of the collectors weighed heavily on him. They had no time to waste. Every moment counted. Grace, ever loyal and resourceful, helped him sift through old texts and maps, while Dr. Green worked tirelessly on decoding the fragments of the symbols. They spent their nights in a hidden room at Dr. Green's private residence, a place she had secured for moments just like this. The walls were covered in old manuscripts, maps of ancient ruins, and blueprints of lost civilizations. It was the perfect place to connect the dots, and Malcolm knew that their discoveries were only the beginning. The symbols in his paintings were becoming clearer now. They weren't just a cryptic language, they were a roadmap. The paths were laid out, and the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, one by one. It wasn't long before Dr. Green had matched the first symbol to a specific location, an ancient, remote temple hidden deep in the mountains of South America. Legends told of a civilization that had vanished without a trace, leaving only ruins and cryptic writings that had baffled archaeologists for centuries. Now, they knew the truth. It wasn't just the ruins that held the power, it was what had been hidden there. The symbols were guiding them to a place where the ancient power lay dormant, waiting to be discovered. And they were getting closer. But so were the collectors. Malcolm could feel their eyes on him now. The pressure was mounting, and it was only a matter of time before they would come for him again. The collectors had been watching his every move, and it was no longer safe for him to stay in the city. If they knew what he was up to, they would stop at nothing to take control of the situation. The moment they realized he was on the same path, everything would be at risk. Grace had made the decision for them to leave. They couldn't afford to take the risk of staying any longer. The collectors were powerful, and their resources were vast. But if they reached the site before Malcolm and Dr. Green did, everything would be lost. They couldn't let that happen. "We leave tonight," Grace said, her voice firm. We have to get ahead of them. Malcolm nodded, his mind already racing through the logistics. They had a flight to catch, and the team would need to move fast. Time was running out. As the night settled over the city, Malcolm packed the last of his belongings into a small bag, carefully tucking away the latest drawings of the symbols. His heart pounded as the realization hit him. They were about to enter a world that was both thrilling and terrifying. The power that lay hidden in the temple was beyond anything he had ever imagined. And no matter how much he wanted to believe that he could control it, he knew that once they uncovered it, there would be no going back. The flight to South America felt interminable. Despite the excitement of the mission ahead, Malcolm couldn't shake the heavy feeling of dread that gnawed at him. He had seen the danger of the collectors firsthand. They were ruthless and unrelenting, and they had the resources to ensure they would come out on top. But they weren't just after Malcolm's art anymore. They were after something far more dangerous, control over a power that could change the very course of history. Grace sat beside him on the plane, her face set with determination. "We're doing the right thing, Malcolm. We're doing this for your art, for the world. We can't let them have it." "I know," Malcolm replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But what if we're not ready for this? What if we can't control it?" "We have to try," Grace said, her hand resting on his. "The world is at stake now. And we're the only ones who can stop them." Malcolm gazed out the window as the plane soared through the clouds, his thoughts swirling. He had always believed that art was a force for good, a way to connect people, to bring beauty into the world. But now, art had become a battleground. The collectors had proven that there were those willing to destroy anything in their path to gain power, and they had no qualms about using his work as a means to that end. The plane finally landed in a small town on the outskirts of the mountains. From there, they took a series of smaller planes and jeeps, traveling deeper into the jungle. The landscape grew more rugged with every passing mile, the air thick with humidity. They were heading toward the ruins, toward the ancient temple that held the power they sought. It wasn't long before they reached the site. The temple loomed before them, partially covered by vines and overgrowth, its stone walls worn by centuries of neglect. But the symbols from Malcolm's paintings, those intricate, geometric designs, were everywhere. Carved into the stone, etched into the pillars, and woven into the very fabric of the structure itself. Malcolm's heart raced as they made their way inside. The air was heavy with the weight of history. It was as if the temple itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone. And then, they found it. At the center of the temple was a massive stone altar, and on it, an intricately carved chest. The carvings matched the symbols from Malcolm's work, exactly. His breath caught in his throat as he approached, realizing that this was the source of the power they had been seeking. The chest was the key. The key to unlocking the knowledge and power that had been sealed away for centuries. But just as they were about to examine the chest, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the temple. Malcolm's heart stopped. "They're here," Grace whispered. The collectors had arrived. Malcolm felt a surge of adrenaline, the blood rushing to his head. They had made it this far, but it was clear now that this wasn't just a race to find the power. This was a fight. A fight for control over something that could shape the future of humanity. With one last glance at the chest, Malcolm turned to Dr. Green and Grace. "We have to open it before they do." But just as they stepped forward, the heavy doors of the temple slammed open, and a group of armed men entered, their eyes cold and calculating. It was time for the final confrontation.